Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud, Boss Stoned. In this video, we're going to do part 2 of Little Blue Book number 1088, and it is titled The Truth About Mussolini, written by Miriam Allen DeFord, copyright 1926. Now, in this video, we're going to do chapter 3 and probably chapter 4. We'll see how it goes. All right, here we go. Chapter 3, Mussolini's Personal Responsibility. The Duke himself would be well pleased if, when it suits him to do so, he could disclaim responsibility for the murders and other atrocities that have marked the fascist regime in Italy, and could blame them on forces beyond his control. This attitude, as I have said, has been taken on his behalf by various of his admirers, and he would be very glad to have it, the universal belief. I am not going to review once more the Matteotti case, most flagrant of the official assassinations of fascism, for I have covered it fully in the facts about fascism. Here I shall say only the published documents showed very clearly that Mussolini had directly ordered the kidnapping and murder of the socialist deputy, and received papers and passports as evidence that his orders had been carried out. And yet, at the same time, he publicly denounced the crime and called for the punishment of its perpetrators. To be sure, when Cesare Forni, the fascist dissident, named the murderers as evil companions, among whom Mussolini had fallen, the premier took advantage of the opportunity to claim all the men named as loyal, highly regarded friends and supporters. But he continued throughout to pretend absolute ignorance and disapproval of the plot, and has never commented on the incriminating documents which were published throughout the civilized world. A most important article by James Murphy in The Nation, New York, for March 31st, 1926, entitled Mussolini Betrays Himself, gives the exact facts about Mussolini's procedure in this and similar cases. What Mr. Murphy tells about the hounding to death of Pietro Gobetti applies with equal force to the premier's participation in the Matteotti and other murders, and to his actual, if not direct, responsibility for the death of Amendola. It seems that Mussolini has the habit, a very bad one in a man in his position, of never dictating his letters or telegrams, but of writing them in pencil for his secretaries to type. Sooner or later, some of these secretaries have fallen into disfavor, and have left Italy, either voluntarily or by request of the fascist government. Like wise men, many of them have taken with them a fine collection of these rough notes. At the present time, nearly 300 of these incriminating drafts are known to exist in France alone. Gobetti was a liberal constitutionalist, writer, and publisher who had incurred Mussolini's wrath. He was persecuted to the utmost, his house broken into, his office looted, an order passed prohibiting his publishing any book in Italy. Finally, he himself exiled. But this was not enough. A telegram in Mussolini's own handwriting, in Mr. Murphy's possession, sent to the prefect of Turin, reads, "I am told that the well-known Gobetti was recently in Paris, and that he is now in Sicily. Please inform me, and see that you render life still more difficult for this insipid opposer of the government of fascism." Signed, Mussolini. What rendering life still more difficult for a victim of fascism means was evidenced when Gobetti was buried in Paris in February of 1926, 2 years after this telegram was sent. A terrible beating he received at the hands of fascists had brought on heart trouble, which, complicated by anxiety and distress, became the persecutions to which he was subject, caused his death at the early age of 25. Others of these penciled drafts, quoted by Mr. Murphy, show the premier's direct participation in some of the worst excesses of the fascist party, outrages of all kinds. Mr. Murphy says, "Personally, I have examined over 200 of these incriminating missives. They show Mussolini to be what he practically admitted himself to be in the Parliament on January 3rd of 1925, the ringleader of a criminal gang. He is shown in these writings as his own agent provocateur. Through anonymous articles written by his own hand and published in the fascist press, he prepares the terrain for subsequent fascist attacks. He orders fascist meetings to take place in one city after another, and he himself writes the resolutions which are to be passed. I have in my hands the text of a resolution which was adopted at a fascist meeting in Milan in 1924. It breathes out fire and destruction on the enemies of fascism, declares that the local fascists can no longer bear the burden of legal restraints, and calls upon the government to crush its political opponents by force of reprisals. This document comes from the hands of the same Mussolini who, during that January 1924, after the first attack on Amendola, who has since died as a result of further beatings, was proclaiming in the Italian parliament that all fascist deeds of violence were execrated by himself. Also the same who said to the correspondents of the Manchester Guardian, as previously quoted, "Bloodshed must cease. They must obey my orders and keep the peace." Another incriminating manuscript shows Mussolini's connection with the attack made on Cesare Forni on March 12th of 1924 in Milan. A day or so previously, Guanta, secretary of the fascist party, had written a circular in which he ordered that life be made impossible, Mussolini's favorite phrase, for Cesare Forni. The day following the attack on Forni, an editorial was published, both in the Imperio and the Popolo d'Italia, Mussolini's own paper. It was entitled, "The Traitor Must Die." The traitor, in this case, means whoever abandons fascism. The article was a defense of the attack on Forni and regretted the fact that the attackers had not gone further. It was written by Mussolini himself. The extreme importance of Mr. Murphy's article is proving the direct personal liability of Mussolini. Justifies a further quotation from it. This shows the dictator's part in the outrages against the Catholic Popular Party and throws a light on his relation to the Vatican, apparently in good Orthodox style. His religious views are not permitted to interfere with his political activities. Another series of outrages in which Mussolini is shown by his own handwriting to have been the principal agent were the lootings and burnings, bludgeonings and murders which took place in Milan and the neighborhood immediately after the elections of April 1924. Mussolini came to Milan on election day to vote the fascist ticket, but in Milan, the fascists obtained only a minority of the votes, a remarkable achievement in the face of the conduct of elections described in the Facts About Fascism. Enraged to the point of insanity, the dictator ordered out the torch and the petrol can, the bomb and the dagger, subjects of the favorite battle hymn of the fascist, for use against his political opponents. The principal objects of these attacks were not the socialists, whose organization had already been effectively wrecked, but the Catholic People's Popular Party. Cooperatives were destroyed, stocks were looted, workmen's clubs were burned to the ground, political adherents of the People's Party were bludgeoned wholesale, and one or two deaths occurred. The Archbishop of Milan and the Catholic Association implored the prefect to order the terror to cease. But the prefect declared that he was powerless against superior orders. Mussolini was in Milan. On or about April 9th, Mussolini left the city, but he failed to countermand the orders. A popular uprising was imminent, so the prefect, followed and caught up with Mussolini at Parma. Then Mussolini agreed to call off the dogs of war. During the horrors, a leading article appeared in the Popolo d'Italiana at Milan justifying what was taking place. The article was written by Mussolini himself. We have the original document in his own handwriting. It is interesting to note that at the same time, he sent 2 telegrams officially to the local clergy denouncing what had happened. But more was to come. The Pope sent 500,000 francs to relieve the distress caused by the fascists in the Milan neighborhood. Immediately, a communique was anonymously sent to all the newspapers by the Volta agency in Rome. The communique was a veiled protest against the action of the Vatican and contained personally insulting references to the Pope. The communique was also written by Mussolini. Mr. Murphy's life would not be worth very much in Italy at present. No one has more thoroughly exposed the hypocrisy and brutality of Italy's dictator. He goes on to the Pisa outrages against the Popular Party in the winter of 1924 to 25. 2 or 3 murders took place. The offices of the Catholic newspapers were burned. The Catholic clubs and cooperatives were looted and destroyed, while the police looked on as uninterested spectators. On that occasion, Cardinal Maffei, the famous Archbishop of Pisa, telegraphed to Rome the following comment on what was taking place. As a bishop, I weep. As an Italian, I am disgraced. Following this, Mussolini sent the following telegram to the prefects of Florence and Pisa. Naturally, it was a secret message, but we have the manuscript of it in the dictator's own hand. It runs as follows. To the prefects of Florence and Pisa, in view of the unfavorable repercussion of the Vatican arising from the recent anti-Catholic incidents, it will be well for the local directors of the fascist provincial federation to visit the headquarters of the Archbishop and present official expressions of regret and renewed declarations of high respect which fascism has for the Catholic religion. Signed, Mussolini. Doubtless Cardinal Maffei's grief and shame were supposed to vanish before the Judas kiss. Note, says Mr. Murphy, the reason why the apology is to be made. Not because the premier disapproved of what had happened, but in view of the unfavorable repercussion at the Vatican. In the face of these revelations, there can be no doubt that Mussolini was also personally responsible for the dreadful riots against the Freemasons of Florence in October of 1925, resulting in 18 murders, to say nothing of the wholesale crushing of the socialist and communist movements throughout Italy ever since the fascists became powerful. Mussolini himself, a Machiavelli, who is not wise enough to wipe out his own tracks, is the evil genius behind the subversive policy of the fascist party. That's the end of chapter 3. And I think we'll take a hydration break. Hydrate, Maddie. And we'll go on to chapter 4. Chapter 4, Reaction to Mussolini's Tyranny. It is an axiom of government that a strong popular sentiment can be driven underground but cannot be crushed. That is why wise governments conciliate their minorities. Fascism has endeavored to destroy them instead. The result is that Mussolini will perhaps fulfill his expectation of dying with his boots on, of an assassin's bullet. And he did. A strong leader must be a beloved one as well, as Lenin was. Really? Probably very few persons in Italy love Mussolini, and many fear him. Fear is the father of hatred. If resentment brews, says The Nation in an editorial of November 25, 1925, it boils below the surface, but the Italians are a hot-blooded race, and fascism has placed a curb upon them more sudden and more constricting than any modern nation has had to endure. The London Daily Herald reported a curious conversation at the Locarno Convention. which indicated the attitude toward Mussolini of the newspapermen, always sensitive conductors of popular feeling. The dictator, by way of baiting the Herald's correspondent, inquired of him, "Is communism marching on?" "I'm not a communist," answered the correspondent. "Oh, I thought you were," Mussolini replied. "But perhaps I am mistaken." "Yes, as is often the case," retorted the newspaper man who was standing near. Every other minister and representative at Locarno went about unaccompanied and unarmed, but Mussolini was preceded and followed by a score of armed guards, even when he rode in an automobile. He was the only important person not invited to the dinner given by the foreign correspondents to the leaders of the delegations in attendance at the conference. But all this, it will be said, merely shows Mussolini's unpopularity outside of Italy. There have not been wanting evidence of the increasing resentment against him in his own silent boundaries. Dissidents in the fascist party, like Forni, have had their say. The suppressed minorities have issued surreptitious anti-fascist and anti-Mussolini papers, like the famous Non Molaire, and Italians escaped the more liberal territory, and Italians escaped to more liberal territory, have added their opinions, and, as Mr. Murphy shows, their guilt-dealing documents to the growing movement against him. At present, Mussolini is still firmly in the saddle. But if disease does not kill him first, or mental incompetence overtake him, the revolt against him and his party may yet gain sufficient strength to be effective. There is at present in Italy a law which makes it a criminal offense, punishable with a prison term of varying lengths, to say or write anything insulting to or derogatory of Mussolini. When a man must have such a law passed, it means that he realizes he needs it. A woman, Malvina Fragoli of Florence, was recently sentenced to 8 months imprisonment for violation of this law in a private conversation. A case still more interesting to Americans, and one which illustrates the dangers of traveling in Italy at present, is that of John Adams Abbott, a young descendant of 2 American presidents. Abbott was touring Italy with his mother and got into a dispute with a guide named Astrologo. The guide followed him to a restaurant and precipitated a fistfight. When he was getting the worst of the combat, he called for help and informed the police, who responded that Abbott had insulted Premier Mussolini. Abbott denied having even mentioned Mussolini's name, but the effect of the unfounded charge was sufficient to throw this citizen of the United States into jail for a week before the action was dismissed. One natural result of conditions under fascism is the emergence of unauthorized and usually slightly unbalanced private individuals who feel it incumbent upon them to counteract the violence of the fascists by propaganda, by deed of their own. Such was Giovanni Cervi, who assassinated the fascist deputy Armando Cessalini in Milan in September of 1925. 2 of these have aimed at Mussolini himself, though in both cases their attempts were unsuccessful. The first of these attempts, in October of 1925, had been open to suspicion of having been engineered by Mussolini himself as an excuse for further suppressive measures. Sound familiar? This, however, was never proved. It was claimed that a former socialist deputy, Tito Zenoboni, disguised as an army officer, had secreted himself in a hotel across the square from the Chigi Palace in Rome, from the balcony of which Mussolini was to speak, and had prepared to shoot the premier when he appeared. He was portrayed and apprehended, and a rifle with telescopic sights was seized, whereupon he confessed. The Nation of November 25th comments editorially in this wise: "All the elements of the best musical comedy were there. The mysterious stranger who engaged not 1 but 3 hotel rooms, giving on the Palazzo Chigi, where the premier was expected to speak. And my page came out. Let me see. That was not the right page. There we go. The attentive host, who saw as he was watching the crowds from the sidewalk and waiting for the great man to appear, a malevolent eye gleaming from a particular window in his hostelry. The brave police who, having scented the plot, needed only this hint to rush to the room with the balcony, where they found a man in the uniform of a major general, a black shirt deceptively showing above his tunic, the blinds closed, and the malevolent eye trained along the barrel of a rifle pointed through a slit in the window covering. Then, of course, there were tons of seized documents reminding us of procedures during and after the war against radical organizations in this country. Lodgings taken in out of the way quarters of the city, and last, but by no means least, a beautiful young woman arrested as the accomplice of the pseudo major general. Now we have te deums, letters of congratulations, a great meeting of 100,000 in the Plaza Colonna at Rome, at which the premier, with a wave of his hand, quieted the thirst of the crowd for blood revenge. "You will obey because I wish it," he said magnificently, and of course they did, and went home like lambs. It is perhaps doing Signor Mussolini, who one assumes has no real wish to be assassinated, a grave injustice to point out that all this has a fishy smell, especially when it is so promptly accompanied by even severe measures against the opposition of fascismo. 7 more papers have been suppressed or are daily censored. The jails have been crowded with suspects. The attempted assassination of April 7th, 1926, however, was undoubtedly genuine, though just as undoubtedly the work of a madwoman. Preparatory to his grandiose tour to Tripoli, Mussolini was leaving an international convention of surgeons, which he had just addressed. As he raised his arm in salute to the multitude gathered to see him pass, an Irish woman, resident in France, Miss Violet Albina Gibson, sister of Lord Ashbourne, fired point blank at him. Mussolini involuntarily threw back his head, and the bullet passed through his nostrils, inflicting a slight flesh wound. He recovered almost immediately, sufficiently to say to the crowd, "I desire that the country be not alarmed. I do not want reprisals. It is my will." Had the assailant been an anti-fascist Italian, it is doubtful whether these words would have been either uttered or obeyed. As it was, Miss Gibson was at once placed under arrest and freely confessed her intention to kill the premier. Her trial was scheduled for July 1926. Enrico Ferri, the famous criminologist, acted as her defense attorney. Oh, sorry, it says defense counsel. And was able to show very plainly that the woman was suffering from religious mania. She had previously been confined in an English asylum and had made previous attempts at religious sacrifices. She is an excessively devout Catholic. At this writing, the trial is not concluded, but the probability of Miss Gibson will be deported and then confined by her family in an asylum for the insane. And that's pretty much what happened. I looked it up. She died in an insane asylum her family had put her in. Augusto Turati, the new general secretary of the fascist party, the next day issued an obviously inspired manifesto in which he said, "Once again, God has saved Italy and its head. The Duke commands that there shall be no act of violence. You must obey. Fascism will inflict upon itself the painful discipline of repression, being sure that nothing can arrest the march of history." Even so, that night, a socialist leader in Naples, who had the further misfortune to be a Jew, a man named, Mogdalani, was attacked by fascists and seriously wounded. He had been the attorney for Matteotti's widow. In the University of Padua, the fascists rioted against foreign students. In Calabria, 3 persons were killed and many wounded, and in Milan, 20 anti-fascists had their homes wrecked and burned and were themselves severely beaten. The real danger to Mussolini is not the accidental bullet of an irresponsible fanatic, but the growing dissension within his own party. Sorry, had to check, make sure my mic was still on. The most striking manifestation of which was the virtual dismissal of Roberto Farinacci, fascist Secretary General and previously Mussolini's right-hand aide, in the spring of 1926. Farinacci, disinclined to take his defeat with equanimity, is organizing all anti-Mussolini forces that he can find in and out of the country, and is training them secretly for military resistance to the dictator. He would be, however, no improvement on Mussolini. He is known popularly as the Tyrant of Cremona, is an extremist of the most violent type, and was the chief defense counsel for the Amerigo Domini and in his trial for the murder of Matteotti. Even those most bitterly opposed to Mussolini can see only disaster in such a sudden removal as his assassination would involve. Ottorino Ronchi, editor of the San Francisco Italian newspaper, and one who knows Mussolini well, voiced this point of view when he said in an interview on the day of the attempted killing of the premier, "There is no man in Italy today who could step into Mussolini's shoes. By a strange coincidence, the one outstanding anti-fascist leader, Giovanni Amendola, died the other day in France, where he was in exile. He died as the result of wounds he received when assaulted by mobs in Italy. The anti-fascist movement has been dissipated and disorganized, and there appears to be no outstanding fascist who could have seized the reins, though Mussolini has, it is said, nominated his own successor in case of his sudden taking off. Undoubtedly, there would have been disorder, bloodshed, and fighting all over Italy had Premier Mussolini been slain." Fear of the unknown. Even if this be so, Mussolini's tenure of power is by no means so secure and permanent as his capitalistic well-wishers in this and other countries hope and believe. It may even be, by the strange repercussion of one country's affairs upon another's, in this age of close affiliation, that a radical uprising in another country will precipitate the overt conflict between fascism and communism, or socialism, which will probably give Mussolini his final conga. Whatever be its general results, the British fascists, who claim 800,000 enrolled members, were, during the general strike, driving through the streets of London, black-shirted and bearing provocative signs. Although discouraged by the government, they issued a proclamation calling for recruits and attributing the strike to foreign, by which they meant Russian, paid emissaries and native traders. So strong were they that it was necessary to throw a cordon of police around the plant of the Daily Herald, lest they attack this organ of labor. Remembering the British capitalist who said to Shaw Desmond, "We shall take fascism over as a going concern, appointing our own men instead of those now at the head," one wonders whether the ex-radical and power-drunk Mussolini may not, in a general European conflict, be one of the first for whom a substitute will be found. And that is the end of chapter 4, and that's where we're going to end this video. Thanks for listening to Little Blue Book number 1088, titled The Truth About Mussolini, written by Miriam Allen DeFord, 1926. Thanks for listening, and join me in part 3.